Hello and welcome to WION Live Broadcast from Washington, D.C. I'm Simon Marks and these are the headlines of this Wednesday. Vladimir Putin announces a partial mobilization of Russians to join the fight in Ukraine and embraces referenda on the annexation of pro-Russian regions of Ukraine. The European Union says the moves show the Russian leaders' desperation over Moscow's military failings. Shares in Britain's biggest defence company, BAE Systems, jumped 5.3%, and oil majors BP and Shell climb nearly 2.5% after Russian President Vladimir Putin made his announcement. Britain unveils a 6-month plan starting in October to pay about half of business energy bills as Prime Minister Liz Truss targets the soaring cost of living. At least 7 people, including a member of the security forces, have been killed in Iran during unrest sweeping the country, as anger at the death of a woman in police custody fuels protests for a 5th consecutive day. And 230 pilot whales are found stranded on the coast of Tasmania at the same site where the island state's largest ever stranding took place 2 years ago. In just over an hour, US President Joe Biden is set to address the 77th session of the UN General Assembly. It's the first fully in-person General Assembly since the COVID-19 pandemic began. It is also the first time that world leaders have had a collective opportunity to meet since the Russian invasion of Ukraine got underway in February. The White House National Security Advisor says the speech will describe Joe Biden's vision for an American foreign policy and will include a firm rebuke of Russia's unjust war on Ukraine. The speech will come just hours after Russian President Vladimir Putin announced a partial mobilization of additional troops and again threatened to use nuclear weapons. President Biden may also address ideas to reform the UN Security Council, currently composed of 5 permanent members, including Russia. All of them have veto powers. There are also 10 non-permanent members elected by the UN General Assembly. The question of reforming the Security Council has been raised by nations including India for a long time. But this is the first time in years that the United States has indicated an openness to taking action on the concept. Joe Biden is also likely to highlight issues including global food insecurity, the necessity of funding the fight against pandemics, supply chain problems, and the climate crisis. For more on all of this, we cross once again live today to our correspondent in New York, Susan Tehrani, covering the United Nations General Assembly for WION. And Susan, President Biden's speech might perhaps be getting a bit of a fast rewrite in New York this morning following those moves announced overnight here in the United States by President Vladimir Putin. A partial call-up of Russian mails as the Russian military runs into difficulty in Ukraine, a move that President Biden seems certain either directly or obliquely to condemn.
Absolutely. As we know, Simon, President Biden really comes here to rally support for what he calls really a condemnation not only for Russia, but a support for the international world order as he sees it, and democracy against autocracy, but also he wants to defend the support that he's been giving Ukraine as it makes advances on the battlefield. And as we're seeing right now with what's happening with Russia, I think the president really is in a position to make that call. But the challenge is, while he does have support from many countries, ultimately will he be able to garner more support from other countries, those countries that have remained neutral or silent or have been weary of coming on the West sides because they have economic issues and entanglements with Russia that really they can't afford right now to forego. So we'll have to wait and see how many minds he changes. But I think it's also important to note that he comes to the United Nations for the second consecutive year where he sees a geopolitical conflict and a challenge. Last year, if you remember, it was 1 month in after that faulty withdrawal from Afghanistan. And again this year with the conflict in Ukraine.
Susan, let's talk about this issue of Security Council reform. I mean, it seems to me like for almost as long as I've been alive, there's been a conversation about the need to reform the Security Council. But yesterday, Jake Sullivan, the National Security Advisor at the White House, indicated that that is now a conversation that President Biden might be willing to have. So where does that conversation go? Because it's not going to be an easy task, is it? Susan, I'm not sure if you heard that question. I'm wondering if you can address the issue of Security Council reform and that indication by the White House that President Biden is willing to begin addressing the concept.
Right. Yeah, no, I'm sorry. I missed the first part of the question. Thanks for repeating that. Yeah, the issue of Security Council reform, it's interesting. That's been on the table for years by other countries. But now that we have this conflict with Ukraine, the United States seems hyper interested in confronting it. And we'll see whether or not the president really addresses that during his speech. But we heard from National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan speaking to reporters yesterday that he does want to go beyond what the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations said earlier and indicated that the United States really is serious about reforming the Security Council, and saying something beyond that on the part of the president, will be headline grabbing. It'll be noteworthy. But again, whether or not it'll really have legs and it'll go beyond the rhetoric or not is yet to be seen. I mean, what does reform really mean? On the one hand, everyone knows that the Security Council does need reform because it's been sitting there and, issuing condemnation one after the other without really any concrete results. But what kind of reform is the United States talking about? And I think until and unless that's made clear, then this is going to be perceived in the framework of rhetoric at a General Assembly session and nothing else.
Tough discussions ahead. Susan Tehrani, live for us from the United Nations General Assembly in New York. Thanks very much indeed for that today. So, to Moscow, where, as we said, Russian President Vladimir Putin has ordered the country's first partial mobilization of reserves since the Second World War. In a speech broadcast to the Russian people today, he accused the West of engaging in nuclear blackmail against his country.
I want to remind those who allow themselves such statements about Russia that our country also has a variety of weapons of destruction, and in some areas even more modern than those in NATO countries. And if the territorial integrity of our country is threatened, we will without question use all the means at our disposal to protect Russia and our people. This is not a bluff.
Bewerten und beraten werden, wie darauf zu antworten ist. Jedenfalls ist für mich und für die Bundesregierung klar, dass wir die Ukraine bewerten und beraten werden, wie darauf zu antworten ist. Jedenfalls ist für mich und für die Bundesregierung klar, dass wir die Ukraine ein falscher Schritt erneut aus Russland, den wir natürlich politisch bewerten und beraten werden, wie darauf zu antworten ist. Jedenfalls ist für mich und für die Bundesregierung klar, dass wir die Ukraine ein falscher Schritt erneut aus Russland, den wir natürlich politisch bewerten.
K-방산에 대한 호응이 컨텐츠 혁포식으로 이렇게 급격하게 증가한 가장 큰 이유는 올해 전반기에 발생한 우크라이나 전쟁이 가장 큰 영향을 미치고 있습니다.
이제 각 국가가 느끼고 있는 안보 위협이 이번에 러시아 우크라이나 전쟁뿐만 아니라 잘 아시는 것처럼 대만 관련된 것들 그런 적지 않은 곳에 그런 안보 위협이 이제 실질적으로 다가온 거죠. 그래서 많은 시급성을 느끼고 있습니다. 수요자들이.
It's code red for humanity. The alarm bells are deafening. Wildfires, floods, and hurricanes. Extreme climate events warn of impending doom. Is the world heading towards a climate catastrophe? Watch WION's Climate Tracker weekdays at 12 p.m. GMT, 5:30 p.m. IST.
You don't know how to fix the holes in our ozone layer.
Germany's Vice-Chancellor is among many world leaders condemning the Russian president's moves.
This is another terrible and wrong step by Russia, which we will of course assess politically and discuss how to respond to it. In any case, for me and the German government, it's clear that we will continue to fully support Ukraine during this difficult time.
Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu said 300,000 reservists will now be called up to fight in Ukraine in what's being seen as a significant escalation. It comes after a Ukrainian counter-offensive forced Russian troops to retreat from some occupied territory. Western nations are also condemning Moscow's plans to hold referenda in parts of Ukraine that are under Russian control. The US, Germany and France have said they will never recognize the outcome of those ballots, calling them a sham. Earlier, pro-Russian leaders announced referenda in Luhansk, Donetsk, Kherson and Zaporizhia provinces. These areas represent around 15% of Ukrainian territory. The Russian defense minister said more than 5,000 Russian soldiers have been killed since the start of the conflict. Some unofficial assessments put that number far higher. He dismissed claims by Kyiv and the West that Russia has suffered heavier losses. According to Shoigu, 90% of wounded Russian soldiers have returned to the front lines. For more on all of this, we spoke earlier to Scott Lucas, political analyst and professor of international politics at the Clinton Institute at the University College of Dublin.
Well, I think Vladimir Putin's announcement for a partial mobilization, supposedly bringing up 300,000 reservists to the Ukraine front line, will actually not have that much effect on the battlefield, at least in the short term. And that is, Ukraine is already advancing in the northeast of the country, has taken more than 8,000 square kilometers of territory this month, and it's now beginning to threaten to challenge the Russian proxy areas in the east of Ukraine, what we call the Donbass region. So Putin's announcement is not as much going to change the military environment as much as he's trying to change the politics here. He's trying to do two things. One is he's trying to say to those Russian proxies in the Donetsk and Luhansk regions, as well as in the south of the country, okay, we're still going to support you. We're still going to win this special military operation. And secondly, he's desperately trying to get the international community to split away from Ukraine. He's trying to get them to stop the economic and military aid. So not only did he say today, I'm calling up the reservist, but he made these threats, which is, oh, we have these very big weapons, like nuclear weapons. You really don't want us to use them. I don't think that threat will work against the international community, but it just shows how defensive Putin has become after failing to win this war, despite throwing everything at it for the past 7 months.
Greece is taking major steps to curb energy consumption. The country's prime minister says consumers who reduce their consumption over the winter months will be rewarded with larger bill subsidies. After the announcement, the cables and pylons of the 3-kilometre Rio Antirio bridge was immersed in darkness.
The city of Athens turned off the lights on the mayor's office in a symbolic move to show the effort that is being made by the city to respond to this energy crisis. Our goal is to reduce consumption by the end of the year by 10%, and an example is the lighting on the public buildings. We want to implement this, but without restricting the operation of the city.
For a fifth day, public anger is evident on the streets of Iran following the death of 22-year-old Mahsa Amini, who died of injuries she sustained in police custody. At least 7 people have reportedly been killed amid protests, including one member of Iran's security forces. Amini died after she was arrested by the country's morality police for failing to wear her hijab correctly. Her death unleashed latent anger, not just over the role played by the morality police, but also over broader issues, rights, security, and an economy that is reeling from international sanctions. The United Nations has decried Mahsa Amini's death in custody and is demanding an independent investigation.
We are alarmed at the death in custody of Mahsa Amini, detained by Iran's morality police enforcing strict hijab rules, and the violent response by security forces to ensuing protests.
A UN official added that the Iranian authorities should stop targeting, harassing and detaining women who do not abide by the hijab rules in the country. Meanwhile, demonstrations are not restricted to Iran itself. In Istanbul, a group of Iranian protesters chanted slogans against the Iranian authorities. In Toronto, residents rallied in solidarity with Iranian women. Holding placards, scores took to the streets against the strict hijab laws in Iran. Now to the FBI's investigation into the top-secret documents seized by federal investigators at Donald Trump's Florida estate. A U.S. judge appointed by Donald Trump's request to review the rights of the FBI to examine those documents has himself now put Trump's legal team on the back foot, demanding that they provide any evidence to show that some or all of the documents were declassified by the former president before he left office.
The U.S. judge appointed to review documents seized last month by the FBI from Donald Trump's home pressed the former president's lawyers in a hearing Tuesday about whether they had any evidence that Trump had, as he had publicly claimed, declassified some or all of the records at the center of the case. Tuesday marked the first public hearing before Judge Raymond Dearie, who was appointed to serve as what's known as a special master or independent overseer to decide if any of the 11,000 documents found by federal agents executing a search warrant at Trump's Mar-a-Lago, Florida resort should be off-limits to investigators. Trump is under investigation for illegally retaining government records, some marked as highly classified. He has denied wrongdoing and claimed without evidence that the investigation is politically motivated.
And now the unprecedented weaponization of the Justice Department and the FBI to break into and raid the home of a former president of the United States.
The former president has also claimed in social media posts he had declassified the records, but his attorneys have made no such statement in court filings. And when asked by Judge Dearie for evidence of that declassification, Trump's attorneys on Tuesday argued that such a request went beyond the scope of the special master's appointment. Judge Dearie said he was, quote, taken aback by that claim, and added, quote, I think I'm doing what I'm told. Dearie will recommend to the U.S. District Judge presiding over the fight over the seized documents whether any of them fall under attorney-client privilege or executive privilege, a principle that allows presidents to withhold certain information. The Justice Department has argued the appointment of the special master was unnecessary and is appealing part of the district judge's order prohibiting investigators from reviewing some of the seized materials while Judge Dearie reads through them. The August FBI search came after Trump left office with government documents and did not return them, despite numerous requests and a subpoena.
A man set himself on fire near the Japanese Prime Minister's office in Tokyo to protest against the state funeral of former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. Police say the man, believed to be in his 70s, sustained burns on large parts of his body but was conscious. Media reports say he wrote a note that read, "Personally, I am absolutely against Abe's funeral." Prime Minister Fumio Kishida has come under increasing criticism for the planned state funeral for Abe, who was assassinated in July. Public anger is growing over Abe's apparent link to a controversial South Korean church that may have provided the motive for his assassination. Earlier, the governing Liberal Democratic Party said nearly half its lawmakers have ties to the Unification Church. The suspect in Abe's assassination reportedly believed that his mother's donations to the church had ruined his family. Finally from us today, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is facing a backlash after a video of him singing in a London hotel just 2 days before the Queen's funeral has gone viral. His office has defended his actions, a spokesperson for the Prime Minister confirming that the video was genuine. It was taken last Saturday, and in it Trudeau can be seen leaning on a piano as a musician from Canada plays Bohemian Rhapsody. While the Prime Minister, he sings the famous lyrics of the song, a spokesperson for Trudeau said that the Prime Minister joined a small gathering of Canadians after dinner on Saturday. He also added that all of them had come together to pay tribute to the life of the Queen. The spokesperson said that renowned Canadian musician and Order of Canada recipient Gregory Charles was present in the room. The musician started playing the piano, and this prompted some members of the delegation to join in. The spokesperson emphasised that the Canadian Prime Minister has taken part in several activities to pay his respects to the Queen. Prime Minister Trudeau had designated September the 19th as a national day of mourning in Canada. The Queen was, of course, Canada's head of state, prompting critics to accuse Trudeau of showing a lack of respect for the late monarch. Supporters have defended him. The incident drew much discussion on social media, with some users calling the Prime Minister's actions embarrassing, but others saying the incident is being blown out of proportion. And that's all we have for you on this edition of WION Live Broadcast from Washington, D.C. I'm Simon Marks. We'll be back again at the same time, same place tomorrow with another edition of the programme. Until then, stay tuned for all your news updates to WION. World is One.
There are many other